I'm Melinda Baird, Director of Education and Community Outreach at Steinway and Sons in the Washington, D.C. area. But today I am sheltering in place, again, with my own Steinway here in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm happy to welcome you, our listeners and viewers, and most especially our distinguished panelists that are joining us for this second session of the webinar we are calling Pandemic Pedagogy. We have some renowned educators who are musicians and artists and performers in their own right, but who have each shown that they can successfully make this transition and that they are adaptable. And they have some wonderfully creative ideas for distance learning and private teaching, and some performing things that are going on right now in their studios and in their personal careers that are inspiring. And I have already learned so much in my conversations with them. So I'm just so excited to have them with us. We have Brian Ganz, who is a Steinway artist. He's on the Peabody faculty and also artist in residence at St. Mary's College. Welcome to you, Brian.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you and looking forward to learning a whole lot myself.
I think we will all learn a lot today. We have Dr. Eva Mengelkoch, who is professor of piano at Towson University. And I'm so pleased to have you with us today, Eva.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I greatly look forward to the discussion.
Great to have you. Joining us from here in the Washington, D.C. area, we have Lisa Emenheiser, who is a Steinway and Spirio artist. Thank you so much for being with us, Lisa.
Thank you for inviting me. I am also looking forward to this very much.
And last but not least, we have Bonnie Kellert, who also has Peabody and Baltimore connections. She was a star student of Leon Fleischer's, but she now has a thriving, successful studio in the Washington, D.C. area. She's a former president of many of the music organizations here, Washington Music Teachers, Montgomery County Music Teachers. And we're looking forward to learning more about the way her studio has adapted and is working so well. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much. And I'm so pleased to be included with such distinguished colleagues.
We are all excited to be together in this new environment and to learn together. So we also welcome you, our listeners and participants. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to submit questions, you can do that through our Q&A feature on Zoom, or you can also just throw something into the chat. A reminder that if you would like all of the participants to see, you need to select not just the panelists' view, but for all of the attendees to view. And as we discuss technology, which we will be doing today, and different platforms and equipment that some of our pedagogues are using, we will post some of those things in the chat. But as you know, the chat moves pretty quickly. And so if those things disappear and you don't get a chance to see them, we will have links to these and a resource page on Steinway Piano DC's Facebook page and on our website. We will also be referencing some of the wonderful performances that have happened and some of the collaborative efforts of our panelists today. And we will post links to those as well so that you can view those after the fact. You can also watch the first session of Pandemic Pedagogy, which aired on May 19th. So we would welcome you to watch that as well. And this session will be recorded with the permission of our panelists. So if you'd like to forward this to your friends, to other pedagogues for whom you think this might be helpful, then feel free to do that as well. So let's get right to it. Brian, let's start with you.
Sure.
How do you like this?
Oh, well, to my great surprise, I'm loving it. I was expecting remote teaching to feel a little bit like a sort of diluted or watered down version of the real thing. But to my delight, I have absolutely loved it. And I'm not sure it's universal among my students that they've loved it, but I think most of them have, and it seems to have been really effective. They're making a lot of progress. Maybe they just also have a little more time to practice. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's just as effective, I find, so far as in-person teaching. So that's been wonderful.
You've actually liked it, and you were surprised that you liked it.
Well, there are many things that I love about it. One thing is that I was expecting it to feel like a reduction in an important element in teaching for me, and that is the kind of musical intimacy, the sense of affinity that being in person brings. And I have found that with enough planning, I think it's important that I know what my students are going to play and that I have the score in front of me. I'm sitting at my piano, and we have a little more musical dialogue back and forth. I'm always a little more likely to jump in and demonstrate something for them and place my phone where they can see my hands and say, you know, try it like this, and place their phone where I can see their hands and let me see exactly what they're doing. There's a little more musical intimacy than I was expecting. And I'm planning now to carry these lessons back into the in-person experience and do a lot more demonstrating and musical dialoguing. I tend to like to talk. Maybe you've noticed that already. And so I think I have to reduce the amount of speaking and a little more musical talk, you know, through the piano. So I'm looking forward to that. There are so many things I could mention, but I'll reduce it to just a few. Another thing that I noticed is that my voice tends to, again, this might be just that I talk too much, but my voice tends to get more tired with remote teaching. And so I've had to space my lessons out a little bit more. But necessity being the mother of invention, what I've discovered through that is that having some time in between lessons is really refreshing, and it makes the lessons better. So I'll reflect on what's happened in the lesson. I might take a walk, do a little practicing myself, and then I'm fresher for the next lesson. And I don't do that often enough when I'm teaching at St. Mary's or at Peabody. So, you know, those are two takeaways that I'll carry back into the studio. Another thing I've loved, and I'll make this the last thing I mention, is that I find it a little more easy to stand up and walk around my studio while I'm teaching. And I'll start dancing, the students playing, and I'll dance along, and that will give insights into how the music is kind of taking flight and how is it working rhythmically. Or I'll conduct, or I'll sing along. They don't always know that I'm doing this. So I'm giving some of my secrets away to them. But I've found that to be very helpful. And if I can work up the nerve, I'll continue that at both schools where I teach.
Yeah, that's wonderful. When you mentioned to me that you were actually dancing around your home studio to see, does this feel like a dance?
Right. Right. Exactly.
This might be different from the way
Right.
you were teaching before. Yeah.
Hopefully, I won't be too shy to do that while I'm at Peabody, where people can look in. At St. Mary's, nobody can see, and unfortunately, there isn't quite enough space in the studio to do that. But there is at Peabody, so we shall see.
Yeah. What a wonderful adaptation. Yeah. In making, not just making the best, but making things better. That's great.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Eva, you had to adapt so quickly, and this required not just moving university programs online, but perhaps changing the pedagogy. What kinds of things have you done to change your pedagogical approach?
Yeah, that's correct. Because as you know, with every student, the infrastructure is different. Some students have the opportunity to move back home with their parents. They have an upright piano, they have their private room. Some of the students, especially international students, they were trying to figure out what to do. You know, some remained on campus, but then of course they're not necessarily keyboards or instruments. They are readily available. So the chair of our department, he was fantastic. He actually looked at the instruments that we had in the department and delivered some of the better digital pianos, you know, to the students in dormitories who were stranded and who couldn't get home. You know, I mean, there were issues with people getting back into their countries, you know, or not being able to go home. So there was a certain time when some students didn't have instruments, you know, but we still wanted to give lessons. We wanted to make sure that we stayed in contact with the students, you know, especially when suddenly everything moves remotely. The role of a teacher changes quite a bit too. You know, you are much more of a psychologist, you're a support network, you're a cheerleader, you know, because it's sudden. And this is the first big crisis for many of the young people. I mean, we've lived through a lot, right? 9/11, you know, and all kinds of, you know, the swine flu. But this is the first big thing that they experience. So the pedagogy, of course, had initially, there were some lessons that I just, you know, in which I just talked with the students about how their lives are. There were issues of isolations, but in more practical terms, when I teach in a more ideal setting, there's so many things that I always want to transmit. You know, there's the stress on why don't you just not practice at the piano for a while, just maybe learn with the score, with the musical score, visualize the score, videotape yourself and see how your body movements align. You know, just looking at yourself, you know, with the height of the bench or how the elbow aligns to the keyboard. And those things often get lost when people have like an ideal instrument at their disposal. You know, they want to practice, they want to play, they want to hear music. But if for a while you actually don't have an instrument at your disposal, or maybe even a chintzy digital piano that just has like a spring action or so, you can actually, for a while, really focus in on those things that might have been a little bit neglected over a while, you know. And for me, it was, even though I thought it was a challenge, it was also a revelation to sometimes see when I had a student, you know, maybe put like a smartphone on the keyboard, that maybe the alignment of the fourth or fifth finger didn't work out, or that there were certain movements that I didn't quite observe to that extent when I was, you know, just in the studio listening more to sound quality or saw the whole picture. Sometimes these more challenging situations, I felt, can be a big plus. Honestly, I wouldn't want to remote teach, you know, permanently. I know that there might be a need next semester, next year, and there are certain advantages, but you know, depending on the infrastructure that the student has at their disposal, you know, the audio transmission isn't necessarily that good. Video seems to be better than audio, you know, and if you want to work on colors, and so there are certain limitations. Even though I have to say, a lot of students found some workaround. You know, there are students who had like laptops but no external microphones, and they use their smartphone as an external microphone. You know, there are all those YouTube tutorials, you know, that I would recommend people watch. And personally, I noticed if I have like if I have headphones, the audio improves quite a bit. You know, and then also you don't get that feedback. You know, since I do have an external microphone, if I don't use headphones, then usually I have this feedback that's not so pleasant to listen to. But in terms of even, you know, I had one student who had a digital piano with a spring action, you know. So, but even if you have a keyboard like that, you can work on muscular control, on teaching the student how can you sit on the piano with the fingers and learn the sensation of the keys moving the fingers rather than you moving the keys. I think there was much more of a sensory approach, you know, the student, the keyboard, the action, than sometimes possible when you know, you teach 1 hour a week, you know, with each student, you know, so, and there are limitations to what you can accomplish. But I noticed the focus was more on physical movement, interdisciplinary too, you know, and observation, a lot of observation.
Yeah, these are really, really beautiful ways that you've adapted, Eva, because you've taken advantage of what was there. In an ideal world, all of our students would have high bandwidth, would have really robust internet connections, and they would have beautiful pianos to practice on. But we got thrown into this in less than ideal circumstances, and so you've adapted that. But you really hit on one very important thing that I think has been a theme for everyone, and that is that the teacher's ability to connect with the student has sort of had to be there in the beginning, and that's something that continued, and that you were able to open up sides of your relationship with the student that may not have been necessary or even addressed before, to become aware of their psychological and emotional well-being, to also address maybe some physical things that we didn't notice when we were dependent on tactile and oral skills. to teach. So we've had to rely on our other senses maybe to become better teachers. Yeah, so wonderful ways that you've been able to adapt in this tricky situation. So Lisa, you've had some opportunities to do wonderful musical things. You are known as an outstanding performer and collaborator in the DC area, but also as just a top-notch teacher.
Thank you.
And so you've had to adapt, and you have adapted in some really creative ways by supplementing your studio with some really interesting things. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Yes. Well, thank you, first of all. I agree with Eva and Brian's, their observations. Totally, most of my studio are younger students. So I had to adapt right away to reaching them in a more personal way, because it just felt literally remote. It felt distant for the lessons. And I've got this sense that many of the students were really feeling the loss of being with their friends, with their, well, in the case of piano, here with me, where we can inspire one another. So I was feeling so badly about this, and I thought, what can I do that's different? And I ended up opening up a Friday workshop to my students free of charge, where this has been 11 of them now, where it's only 45 minutes, but they seem to really love it. And we go through different topics. Let's see, started out with Gershwin, who I think was a rather colorful character, and I had some students playing some Gershwin, and then went to Debussy, which I had to leave out quite a bit about Debussy. And then we go Schumann, Bach, Beethoven. I also am having some guest speakers. I had Laura Johnson on to speak about Bach ornamentation. Matt Pearson, who's the head piano technician at the Kennedy Center, talked about the insides of the piano. I had my husband talk about how to build a harpsichord, as you can see in the background, which he built here. Things like that, and they love it. This week I'm going to do music as a career path, and I have some of my colleagues speaking about what they love in their work. And it seems to be a personal way to reach out that's different. You know, I never had enough time in the lessons, our normal lessons, to discuss what I wanted to discuss, or to have the energy to do that in the time frame. Everything was so condensed. This really seems to make a difference. And I think I can count maybe 2 students in the last 11 workshops that haven't been able to make, that are there. And they don't have to, of course, attend, but they love this.
That's so great. So you're creating a new community in a way.
Yes, because now I think it's reaching out to the National Symphony Youth Associates program. I think it's joining this week, and we'll see how long it goes on, with the summer being sporadic in lessons. We'll see. I might not do it every Friday, but it's been good for me too. It gives me direction. I have been learning a lot about these different topics. And so this is all a good thing to keep busy, keep occupied.
Yeah, it's great. I want to join. I want to see what you're doing. And it's wonderful that you were so concerned about your students' psychological well-being as well on this end, you know, for these younger kids, that you didn't want them to feel isolated. And so as a teacher and as a mentor, you supplemented that with some other things that have enriched their piano study.
I do. I have noticed with Brian and Eva that, you know, what they were saying, I see a lot of similarities, but with the younger kids, some of them are really truly thriving with this. You know, they really are doing well. They have more time to practice. And when we talk, it's like this, you know, we talk very close, and it's not like that I'm at their side here at the 2 pianos. We have a very physical connection that seems to be working in that regard. For things like the logistics when you're younger, to try to say, okay, you know, you missed that E flat. It's like, well, what E flat? It's very hard to show them. I can't just go and circle it like I used to. So one of the things I did was, I bought a large iPad Pro that now I'm using an electronic formatting for the music, which probably some of you have already been using, but this was a bit of a learning curve for me, but I love it. I will continue to use it. It's called Fourscore, and the iPad is the largest Pro that you can get. So now during the lessons, I'll be looking at piano score, making the annotations using the Apple Pencil, and then after the lesson, just hit the share button, and I email the corrections to them, and they really love that. I get emails saying, you didn't email me the Beethoven, so they're interested in it. They like it. It's different. It's new. It's engaging them.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Bonnie. And we have up in the chat a link for the iPad Pro and for the program that Lisa has suggested, and then we will also put this on our website as well. So yeah, way to adapt using great technology and making it work in the moment.
Yeah, and just one more thing to mention, I agree that by the time I'm finished teaching, I'm completely exhausted, mostly physically with my voice. I do have an external mic, but I have to speak into it pretty loud in order for the students to hear it and for me to interrupt them. As much as I recommend them using headphones, it's still hard to get their attention. So one thing I'm going to start using is, I don't know how to pronounce it, a lavalier. You know, it's one that clips on.
No.
So it's that is something that I'm looking into as well. I think that's made by Rode, R-O-D-E, and it's called a Go lavalier. That'll make it much easier on my voice.
Yeah, great suggestion. Thank you so much. Well, this provides a nice transition into our technology queen, Bonnie Kellert. And it's just so impressive, the things that you're doing, Bonnie, but some of this you already had in place before COVID-19 hit. So kind of tell us where you were and tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and then we may take a little tour of your studio.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I was very lucky that my husband is very techie, and we had been making recordings in the studio. And so, for example, the mic I'm talking into right now has saved my voice. So I understand exactly what Lisa was talking about. And Brian, I had the worst sore throat for the first week of teaching online. And now I have this mic and I can whisper. I mean, it's amazing what I can do, and the kids can hear me, and there's no push for me to use my voice, you know, in a harder way. And so we had microphones in the house, and we basically went out and bought one of those Logitech cameras before they now are very hard to get, and that's the one that you're viewing me with. And I also have one over my head on a boom, so that I can give views. Oh, here, I can show you. For example, sorry, this one? Here, I can do a split screen if I want, but this overhead is now showing the keyboard. And then, let's see, is that also there? So they can see what I'm doing, but basically if I wanted to demonstrate something about finger position and basically that's it, and then maybe how to move their wrist or their arms, this overhead really helps a lot. That was a big change for me to deal with cameras, learn to speak into the camera. The reason I got the camera was that I would have been talking to the kids sideways and then constantly doing that, so that didn't work very well at all. So I've learned to just rotate my body and swing around. The other thing that my husband did was get me a separate mic for inside the piano. And so the sound is very clear and clean with that. We splurged a little bit on some equipment. And I don't know if you want me to show that. One of them is called an audio interface. So the audio interface allows me to change what I'm doing. I mean, I have a hub. Here's my hub. And really that was very necessary because there's only so many ins and outs on a laptop. So the interface can do a lot of things that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. I can show the kids, I think you're in the camera, darling.
I'll just mention while we're getting this little tour, Bonnie, that Bonnie's husband, Alan Goldberg, has really been the one that's helped her beef up her studio and create this technological masterpiece, we have him on a second camera so that he can show you around Bonnie's studio as she mentions these different technologies. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. So if you see Alan in there, or if you see as much as we love two Bonnies, we only have one, so we're trying to split her in half, and Alan's going to help us with that. So
well, go ahead. Yeah, what I was doing before was this little thing called that's a video switcher, and that was allowing me to go to different cameras. And that was the most expensive thing. That is a new gadget that we bought. Actually, we ended up buying it from Australia, and it took 2 months to get here because of COVID. So, yeah. But that's an extravagance, I told my husband. But the interface is really necessary. I mean, there's a gazillion things going in and out of it. The thing that I really like the best about it is that now I can share musical examples from my recordings and my CD collection, and we can play it through this any interface and into the laptop and into the connection to what the kids are going to hear, and that's been really kind of cool. I think that what you could have seen for a moment there was that right next, well, in the background, I have a television screen, and I have blown up the kids' picture on the television screen. So now I have a gargantuan 30-inch picture of my kids. And I love the way everybody's been talking about how they view their student differently. I must say, I am very acutely aware how they're holding their hands and what they're doing with their bodies and, you know, things like that. The sound part for teaching is a challenge because of what they have at home. But I think I pretty much, the other thing that we do is that we play the sound through these professional speakers that I have in the back of the room, and that makes everything really clear. And Melinda, I think that you still have Alan on your screen there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that basically is a real quick tour.
It's so impressive. I mean, it's a little bit overwhelming for those of us who are still just teaching out of an iPad, but really incredible the things that you've done. And several of these equipment recommendations are in the chat, but I'll just remind you that if you didn't catch it the first time around, those things will be available later on our website. I would also remind any of our listeners that they can send in questions through the chat feature or through the Q&A, and we will try to direct those back to our panelists. We would love to hear from you. Bonnie, this is just so impressive and really just amazing, the things that you're doing. Let me ask you a follow-up question. We've talked a lot about technology, and the technology is really incredibly impressive, and it's a great tool, but I had a chance to talk to your husband, for which I'm grateful, because he jumped in and said, you know, the technology is wonderful, but really the key here is Bonnie. And he said, you know, she's just a great teacher. And she had a relationship with these kids before, and that translates and it continues. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of the teacher relationship in all of this?
Well, that's actually the most important thing in my book. And I've been very lucky. I know some students quit their lessons rather than go online. And I've had 100% retention. And I think, a really nice rapport with the kids to begin with, because when they would come into the studio, we were all huggy and that kind of thing. And there's a nice, loving kind of relationship. And when you're able to communicate with your students and demonstrate, like Brian said, you can play for them, and you feel like there's a musical connection. The parents have gotten so much more involved. The kids are practicing more. That's really obvious. They don't have as much to do. But I feel like if I can communicate with them and still give them a love of music and give them a way of enjoying their pieces, what I have found, and I like what Lisa's doing, I think that's great. I sometimes take a picture of the music that I'm writing on, and send them either an email or a text message that shows what I've been writing. It's so hard to have the same music edition all the time as your student has. That's been a problem. But I think that if I'm able to still show them this is how the music goes and this is how you can express yourself, and you still need to listen to music and do research on composers and understand everything that's on the page. But I am teaching differently now about learning a new piece, because they're sitting there and we're analyzing the music and they're getting out their colored pencils and drawing all over the place and having such a good time doing that kind of project. That's been different because they're going to be on their own, a lot of the time. I don't know if that's really answering all of your question, but.
Yeah, it's so much good information that you're doing blended learning. You're combining your good relationship and your powerful teaching skills as an instructor with your love of music and your love of the kids, and that's really coming through in the things that you do. And I think, Lisa, with you as well, just these enriching experiences that you're providing for your kids, but that came first from a concern about them and how they were doing and their continued development.
One thing interesting to go on what you were saying, Bonnie, is about using blended media. One of the nice things about Zoom is you can do share screens. And just last week, I started using share screen a lot more. And in the middle of the lesson, instead of saying, well, did you go ahead and listen to this particular recording that I asked you to listen to? I said, yeah, okay, let's go. And we just pull it right up. And they're like, wow, that's great. So I'm finding myself using these tools more in the teaching. So in that regard, the teaching has changed. It's become more cohesive as a unit,
yeah.
rather than just making an assignment and having a student go do the assignment.
Yeah, we're getting all these tools that we can bring back into the package, hopefully, to make ourselves more complete teachers. Yeah, Eva, your skills and background and wonderful experience as a teacher have really helped you adapt to this unique situation, but it also stems from a concern for the students and how they're doing. How are your students doing now that they've finished school?
Well, a lot of them are just taking some time off and they're catching up on sleep, because the piano lessons are only one thing, right? I mean, there are theory classes, general education classes, and all the professors had to switch mode of teaching, within a week or so, so some teachers were learning slower than other teachers, so I think the students, in my experience, mentioned most of them felt that they had to put in quite a bit more time generally, in order to accomplish the same thing, because, teachers use different modes, an ensemble might have been Zoom, something else might be taught on Blackboard or Skype for business, so there were all those different platforms, and even though the students grew up with technology more so than most of the professors, they needed to adapt, and but I've observed the students that I would consider more to be introvert, they're the ones that thrive the best if they had a family and could move back in with the family. Those were the ones where I could really clearly feel they didn't have to deal with the social aspect of college life. And they felt a little bit more focused. Then we have other students where you really sense, that the sense of loss, because music departments often, they're sort of equalizers. Everybody has the same access to the practice rooms, to the same instruments, to the same performance spaces. And teaching remotely and having the students, not on campus really emphasizes the infrastructure differences, and also the socioeconomic, concept and circumstances. So that needed to get taken into account. But there's one thing that I felt that applies to all the students, the happy ones and the ones that felt more isolated than ever. They all have to learn, that's one of the things that we stress, to become their own teachers. And even if you don't have a good bandwidth, even if you have a not a good digital piano, you can still develop the tool of becoming your own teacher. And you can do it by observing other people teach. You know, it's amazing what's available online, even the simple YouTube videos, you know. You can analyze other professors. There are masterclass databases. You can listen to more music. So, and I felt that the students really progressed in being more independent, because it was sometimes necessary. I had students who live in rural areas, you know, and the internet was out for a week. So they were really on their own. I could write them an email with what I think I would, you know, would want them to do, you know, what tools to explore, or what databases, or how to analyze something, or analytical papers, or even, you know, physiotherapy videos, you know, with hand movements and injury prevention, all those things. But I really felt at the end of the semester that a lot of the students became much more independent. And that was very visible also and audible for the students at the end of the semester, when they had to submit either a live jury or a recital. Some had to choose to record themselves beforehand, but a lot of them learned how to use free editing software. So they were forced to listen to themselves constantly. But in the process of listening, they realized what they were doing not correctly, or what sounded funny in a recorded medium. And so they learned to listen more carefully, and at the same time, they learned how to edit and use Audacity. That's one of the, you know, preferred free softwares, you know. So I felt that my overall mission to make the students independent of me worked towards the end of the semester. It actually progressed quite a bit, and I was extremely proud of my students, because I didn't have a single one who sort of stopped attending, you know, or flunked out, or, you know, they all submitted really respectable jury files and played wonderful recitals. So yeah, that was one of the aspects that I didn't expect. But I think we were all pretty exhausted at the end.
That's great that the juries went successfully, and that they were able to learn how to continue to practice and develop independence. That's such an important skill. Lisa, were you going to add something?
Yes, I think one of the challenges is we have lost the ability to do these live recitals. I mean, it's just, and I've been looking into different ways. I know that, for instance, my studio recital this year is going to be what you were saying. It's going to be basically YouTube video recordings of my students playing, which is a shame. Bonnie, I think you did a live Zoom, but there's also, I've recently become aware of virtual concert halls. And this is, I think, a startup business locally, my colleague Anna Osmanskaya, and it's quite impressive. If you look at it, she has found a way to combine different platforms, or they have found a way in technology, 2 different platforms, I believe, so that is truly live, and it's live streamed. It's not using Zoom, I don't believe. They also even have receptions afterwards. So it's there's a lot coming up, and a lot of people have been quite inventive. And I'm continuing to learn a great deal on how to keep going on this remote performance.
Yeah,
with my own performances as well.
Yeah, I love that this is a true collaborative environment among teachers, that as these things, you know, Bonnie said, I'm waiting for somebody to invent this thing, and it's kind of happening. I mean, it's working in really beautiful ways that we can all take advantage of. We've all been bemoaning the restrictions and sound quality of Zoom, yet here we are on a Zoom call, and we're using the platform, and it's what we've got. And, you know, we all wish we had invested in Zoom stocks 6 months ago.
Yes.
But Bonnie, you did do something really brave. We've all been afraid to have Zoom recitals because of the compromised sound, but you felt that it was really important to have a live experience for your students at the end of the year. So tell us a little bit about how that went.
Well, I must say that I ended up doing the Zoom live because Alan and I tried out some of those other platforms, and we just didn't find it was as satisfactory as it could have been. And I think that the kids really like electronics. These are the kids that know how to work all the devices and do everything. And I talked to several parents who said that they much preferred the idea, even though the sound would be compromised, that they did not want to have videos submitted ahead of time and then sit back and it would have lost the excitement and it's sort of spontaneous and all right, so you made a mistake, it just became more involved, and all the parents sat back with their kids and we were all prepared ahead of time with camera angles, and I had a program that was printed up and we sent it to them ahead of time, and everybody knew when their turn was. It turned out that I got terrific comments from the parents. Is that this year's? Well, this is one from last year. But I mean, I have a very complicated kind of program that comes in a pamphlet form, and the kids love to do it because they submit program notes, which is really kind of cool. And they have their picture in here. Where is that, Alan? Why is that not in there? This was an old one, honey. This does not have a picture. You handed me an old. What happened was that I got really good feedback. The kids had a good time, which was my goal, and to share their music, that was my goal. The sound was horrific half of the time, and that's mostly because of the bandwidth that they have in their house or the device that they're recording with. Look, we can't expect even a lot of teachers to go out and buy a lot of equipment. How long is this going to go on for? It was an investment for me because I do online presentations and it worked out fine for me. But for the kids, the parents don't want to have to buy special equipment. So we were dealing with this Zoom recital in the best way we could. And that was the attitude. I said, we're going to do the best we can. It's going to be a compromised sound. We invited outside guests. They all wrote back and said what a wonderful time they had. And the kids said, well, you have to do the recital. And so some of it has like their picture, and they write a little biography about themselves, and they write program notes about their pieces. And it's a wonderful opportunity for them to share. And I thought in the end, I was feeling pretty good about it. I was terrified at first, but in the end, I think it worked out okay. I would probably try it again.
That's great to hear. I mean, I think we're all a little scared to do something live on Zoom because there are just so many things that are not the way we wish they were, but you've taken that lemon and made incredible lemonade out of it and really made it into something positive that everybody loves.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we definitely tried to do that. And Alan even found some clapping and applause that he inserted between each kid. And they just thought, and then sometimes, yay, or just plain clapping, and the kids loved that. They that added a little sense of humor to it all. And
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So creative and still really interactive, which is wonderful. Mm. So that reminds me a little bit of a project that Brian is working on, and I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the performing that you are doing and some of the things that you've done that are quite creative in this world of remote performances. That's one of the things that we feel really sad about as musicians is the loss of these community experiences as we come together. And so Brian is working on a project for some distance learning and teaching and a festival that he is collaborating with in Italy, the Alba Festival. And this is a part of a St. Mary's collaboration, I understand, Brian.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, Brian is either finished or getting close to completing performances of the entire works of Chopin. Are you done, Brian?
I ought to be done. Because I started in 2011, so it's now been 10 years. We did our 10th recital back in February. And however, I've got 5 more years to go. what I discovered along the way was that I had to repeat some pieces to make the programs a little better balanced. Otherwise, there would be a little too much of the early works of Chopin, and that wouldn't make a totally satisfying program. So to make the programs really fly, there's a fair amount of repetition of certain works. So instead of the 10 years we first envisioned, it's worked out to be 15. So we're only 2/3 of the way through the project, and looking forward to it.
Okay. But tell us about how you've taken your Chopin expertise and translated into this really creative format for some future performances.
Thank you. I lost a connection a few times here, so forgive me. I didn't hear everything you said in preparation for this question. But something I love to do when the occasion is rather informal is to take along all my books of Chopin and invite requests from the audience. I can't play everything Chopin wrote, and there are often some misses. But usually there are more hits than misses. And it's just a lot of fun to be able to play the works that people particularly want to hear. And so we know there's a lot of really fine content on the web now. And it's not hard to turn on a great artist and sit back and listen to a superb recital by the top artists around the world. So our challenge nowadays is to figure out some ways to make the sharing of music more personal than that, despite not being able to meet in person. And so a very dear friend of mine, Alon Goldstein, and I sort of hatched this idea for a festival that he's invited me to perform on later this summer, of inviting his community to make requests. And so through email or through whatever vehicle he can be in communication with his community, they will forward several requests. You know, maybe we'll get a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. And then from those requests, I'll choose maybe half a dozen works. And then those who made the choices will, or made the requests rather, will record a short testimonial about the piece, what it is that spoke to them about the piece, memories they have associated with that, what makes the piece special to them. And they'll forward those testimonials to me. And I will, before I play each work, I'll speak to the testimonial. So it'll be a kind of dialogue. Maybe the same kinds of things have spoken to me about that particular piece. Maybe I have memories similar to those of the requester. And so the whole video will be a more personal kind of dialogue, both about what the pieces mean to us and then enjoying the actual music itself. So I'm hoping that that can be something that other concert presenters are interested in doing. And I'm going to propose it to them as well. It's very recent, so we haven't really gotten it off the ground, but it seems very promising, and I'm very much looking forward to pursuing it and making it happen.
Oh, that just sounds like such a great idea, and what a wonderful and creative way to adapt and to make things better. You and I were actually supposed to be working together at Indiana University in a couple of weeks for the Young Pianist Academy, and that's not going to happen. It's canceled. Like so many other things. So I imagine.
Let's stay postponed.
Postponed until 2022. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So as sad as that is, I'm really glad to hear about the ways that you're adapting and still able to keep your performing life going. Yeah.
And I'll just share also. I was moved to hear everything that people were suggesting, and ideas are wonderful. I was blown away by Bonnie's studio. I knew I was behind the curve technologically, but I didn't know just how behind the curve I was. I was glad to hear you say it was a little overwhelming, because that's exactly what I felt. But I loved what Bonnie did with the Zoom recital. I tried the same at St. Mary's College, and what I noticed, and Bonnie kind of alluded to this too, is that so many people who usually can't make the drive down to St. Mary's. It's a distance away. And very often there are grandparents and uncles and aunts of the students who cannot be present. So that was really wonderful. I met a lot of the family members of my students that I had not had a chance to meet. They got to hear them play live. Bonnie's right, the sound was not good. but it was good enough. We caught the spirit, and we could hear how much work they had invested and how much progress they'd made, and that was the important thing. So it actually ended up being in some ways better than an in-person recital because of who was able to attend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Grandparents from across the world can tune in.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Lisa, you've done some really creative collaborating and some projects that you're currently working on. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, pretty much early on, I realized that all of my performances were canceled, everything. That's the way it is for all of us musicians. And so kind of looked into outlets. Obviously, solo outlets are there to perform and post on social media various solo pieces, which, Brian, I did the opposite. I did some prepared piano, extended piano techniques, feeling it was an opportunity to show them the inside of the piano, which was actually really interesting and fun. I did some George Crumb. But I've also done some remote collaboration. I'm currently learning the Rebecca Clark Viola Sonata with Dan Foster, who's the principal violist with the NSO, and we've posted now 2 movements of that, and that just comes with Dan giving me feedback how, you know, the tempos, the various tempi that he prefers, and then I usually send him a audio rough draft, and then we take it from there. I pretty much lay down the piano part, and poor Dan has to follow whatever I do, and he's amazing. I also did a collaboration with Abel Pereira, the principal horn player. We did some Hindemith. And then the George Crumb Eine kleine Meter Nacht music is a solo piece for extended piano, and I really enjoy that. And that was actually caught Steinway's eye and that was part of a lunch concert series. So whether people were really hoping for Chopin was probably true, but they got George Crumb, and I think they enjoyed it. Also now doing, just did a Rite of Spring, playing 4 hands on the stereo piano. The Steinway has this amazing stereo piano. I don't own it, but I was able to get over to Steinway Piano Gallery and lay down the secondo part to the Rite of Spring for the big so it was fun. I'm also going to do there symphonic dances, Rachmaninoff, and do some orchestra repertoire that I miss. So keeping busy.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about what this literature really is, that you can learn it in this environment in this way without any actual in-person rehearsing contact.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. Yeah, well, you mentioned some of the technology that's helping you to do some fun 2 piano things. I would like to just talk a little bit about what kinds of things you think either your own studio has adapted to, or things that your university associations have given you some tools that are going to make this a better, more comprehensive teaching world in the future. And what kinds of things you may take away from this experience to really make you a better teacher, and what kinds of things have you learned from this experience? So Eva, let's start with you.
Well, I have to say, all through this crisis or opportunity, more positively, tech support at the university has been quite amazing. I think it took some while in order for professors to figure out what platform works best for, certain things, and what doesn't work so well for it. And then also some students don't have the same capabilities on their computer and infrastructure as others, so there are always adjustments to do. But as I mentioned before, what I noticed is for a lot of students, this was the opportunity to become more self-reliant and also more playful at the same time. For example, like Zoom has also the option to have different backgrounds, so while you're teaching, you can actually have the students visit the Beethoven house. Since we have Beethoven year, there are certain things where they can just passively, or in the context of a lesson, actually absorb the environment to some extent. You can do screen sharing, but I've used the background picture thing quite a bit. So that's something that I might do in between, just to there's nothing better than for students to practice Haydn and stroll through Vienna, or Siesta as a castle. So that's something that's quite amazing. With the tools that are, I heard from many students that like microphones are hard to get by these days, affordable ones. I noticed there's, in addition to more self-reliance, more creativity. How can I make do with things that I do have? So that's something that I took away from it and that the students really feel helps them. And the one challenge, since there is so much information out there, there are so many tools, I think the role as a teacher, also as a filter and more of a mentor, has become even more important than it was before. Because, these are young people, often 17, 18, when they start out at the university, and there's all this information, and it's sometimes hard to evaluate, So I think that's the role that the professors have taken on to much more of an extent.
Yeah, we've seen some really beautiful examples of mentoring as each of you has adapted to the needs of your students and use that to help you become better teachers as well. Bonnie, what are you going to take away from this? Are you just going to teach remotely forever now that you have this amazing setup?
No, I don't want to teach remotely forever. They miss my dogs too much anyway. I think that the reason I really don't want to teach remotely forever is what they're dealing with at home. I had a student who is the only one that was doing a Zoom lesson. I've found that FaceTime was working very well for me, and I could hear nuances, I could hear pedaling, I could hear a lot of things. But this kid's lesson, half of it was spent with her fading out or freezing or, oh my God, it was, and I just discovered last week that there are 3 people on the internet while she's having her lesson, so that she was compromised as to the strength that she was able to get. And then she said, oh, here's a button, I can do FaceTime. And I was like, oh my God, after 3 months. And so I find that if I had to do this on a regular basis for the next year, I could probably deal with it. And Brian said, yes, you've got to get up and walk around between students and do stuff. That's really important to refresh yourself. It is exhausting, like Lisa said. You have to explain so much because you can't hold their hand physically and do things and let them feel how your arm feels and do all those touch and physical things. And it takes a lot more explaining. And I'm just absolutely exhausted. I've never been so tired in all my life. But the kids, I think, if I could persuade the parents to just invest in, maybe an external mic or a better Wi-Fi to make sure that they've got a really strong Wi-Fi system in the house, things like that. And I really didn't address any of that with my parents. We just sort of jumped into it. And so now that I see that we're compromised about how the sound goes to them, I hear them fine because I've got the speakers and then everything. But what they're hearing, I think, is not the best thing. And so I would love to investigate that more with my parents. And that's what I would do if I had to keep doing this.
Yeah. So some wonderful things that you've learned through this experience, but still we're all looking forward to a time when we can get back to some in-person teaching. Lisa, what will you take away from this that might make you a better teacher when we get back to normal?
What I keep thinking to myself is collaboration with other professionals like everyone on this panel, that and others, just to continue to learn. There's so much for me to learn and for all of us to continue to grow. It was a big learning curve, an immediate learning curve, but now that I've kind of leveled out, I'm hoping to continue to learn to take it to the next level. Like Bonnie's studio, I know I've been writing down some of the things I can do to improve, because I'm afraid this might be with us for a while, the remote teaching.
Yeah, I think we might be in this for a while.
Yeah.
But yes, we're all kind of in this together, and in a world that's full of divisions right now, it's wonderful to see the musical community come together and for us to want to cross boundaries and really help each other. I think that's a great thing that's come out of this. So Brian, you get the last word. What's the takeaway? What are we going to take from this?
Well, and we've been hearing about it throughout the hour together. I think the role of creativity and initiative and energy, when things are going well, it's easy to get a little bit complacent, to ride the wave more than to drive the wave. And I think what I'm learning in this hour and what I'm learning throughout this whole period is how important every vestige of our creativity, every iota of our energy, if we can be constantly asking ourselves, how can we make more of a difference to our students? How can we give them more attention? How can we give them more nurturing, more resources, bring more of our own creativity to bear, pay more loving, more caring attention to them throughout the week, then this can be a benediction in a way. There's a wonderful poem by Rilke. I encourage everybody to read. It's the archaic torso of Apollo, and it ends with a wonderful stern benediction. You must change your life. And while this pandemic is nothing like a work of art, I think we can, through our creativity, we can transform its terrible sternness into a kind of benediction by this constant reminder, you must change your life. And to do so with love and commitment and energy, that's the privilege of being teachers.
Thank you so much. What a great way to wrap up this session. Thank you, all of you. Thank you to Eva, to Bonnie, to Lisa, to Brian, and to you, our viewers and listeners, for joining us for this session. I'm so inspired. I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful to be part of such a vibrant musical community. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Melinda.
Thank you.
And thank you to Steinway.
Bye.
Bye-bye.